The wind howled outside Clara's small apartment in St. Paul, Minnesota, a biting November gust that slipped through the old window frames like an uninvited guest. She sat curled in an armchair, one hand cradling a chipped mug of chamomile tea, the other lazily flipping through a dog-eared copy of National Geographic she'd snagged for 50 cents at a thrift shop on Selby Avenue. The magazine's pages were yellowed, stories of distant jungles and forgotten ruins, a stark contrast to the leaden gray sky pressing against her window. It was the kind of early winter day that felt heavy, as if the clouds were conspiring to squeeze the first snowflakes onto the ground, though none had fallen yet. The silence in the room was delicate, broken only by the faint hum of the space heater in the corner and the occasional creak of the radiator. Clara's apartment was small, a one-bedroom on the third floor of a crumbling brick building, but it was hers, paid for with long shifts at the warehouse, where she loaded boxes onto trucks until her shoulders ached. The phone rang, shattering the quiet like a stone through glass. Clara's eyes flicked to the screen. Dad. Her stomach tightened, a reflex born of years of strained conversations. She hesitated, thumb hovering over the decline button, but something, curiosity, maybe, or the faint hope that this call might be different made her press the speaker button instead. Clara. Her father's voice crackled through, lighter than she expected, almost casual. You don't need to come home for Thanksgiving this year. For a moment she thought she'd misheard. The words hung in the air, sharp and surreal. I'm sorry, what? She said, setting the mug down on the side table. The ceramic clinked against the wood, a sound as dry as her throat felt. We just think it's better if you stay put, he continued, his tone practiced, as if he'd rehearsed this in front of a mirror. Lila's been fragile lately. You know how she gets. We're trying to keep things calm. Clara's jaw tightened. Lila. Her younger sister, the golden child who could do no wrong, whose every whim was treated like a royal decree. Lila, who at 24 still lived at home, flitting from one half-baked dream to another while their parents tiptoed around her moods. Clara leaned forward, elbows on her knees, her voice low but steady. So, what you're saying is I'm not invited because Lila might get upset? Her father sighed, that familiar, exasperated sound that always preceded his attempts to smooth things over. Don't make this a big deal, Clara. It's just one day. You'll be fine. She stood abruptly, the chair creaking in protest. Just one day. Her voice was ice, each word deliberate. You say that after I've sent over $5,200 to the house since last winter? To keep the heat on, to fix the furnace, to make sure you didn't freeze. Silence stretched across the line, punctuated only by the faint hum of static. Clara paced to the window, her breath fogging the glass. Outside, the street was empty. The neighborhood hushed under the weight of the impending storm. She could picture her father on the other end, sitting in his worn recliner in the living room of their old house in Rochester, his brow furrowed, searching for a way to deflect. Don't bring money into this, he said finally, a hint of irritation creeping in. You offered to help. Clara's laugh was sharp, hollow, echoing in the small room. Offered? In January when you called me at 2 a.m. Because the furnace broke and Mom was crying? I paid the $1,200 repair bill. In April, when the oil tank was empty and you said the house was down to 45 degrees. I sent $900. And in August, when Lila decided her artisan soap startup needed $2,000 for supplies and blew through her savings, I covered the heating oil again. Me. Every time. She paused, her fingers gripping the windowsill. I didn't offer, Dad. I did it because you asked and I thought it's what family does. He didn't argue, but his voice softened, taking on that placating tone she hated. Family is family, Clara. Lila's been through a lot. She needs stability right now. Clara stared at the fogged glass, her reflection faint and ghostly. I've been through a lot too, she said quietly. But I was never the priority, was I? She didn't wait for an answer. If I'm not part of the family for Thanksgiving, don't expect me to keep playing the bank for you either. Not this winter. Not ever again. She hung up before he could respond, the screen going black. The room felt colder, though the heater still hummed. Outside, the first snowflakes began to fall, silent and weightless, dusting the sidewalk below. Clara sank onto the edge of her bed, hands clasped tightly in her lap, her thoughts a tangled mess. That call, those few minutes, had severed something she'd been holding onto for years, a fragile thread of duty, of hope that her family might one day see her as more than a resource. She glanced at a framed photo on her bookshelf. Her parents, and Lila at Thanksgiving 5 years ago. Clara had just started her job at the warehouse, grueling 12-hour shifts for barely above minimum wage. She'd taken a Greyhound bus home just to sit at the table, eating her mother's dry turkey and laughing at her father's bad football jokes. That warmth felt like a distant dream now, buried under layers of resentment and unpaid bills. She stood, crossing to her desk, and opened her laptop. The wind outside grew sharper, rattling the window panes. She pulled up the utility account she'd set up for her parents' house 2 winters ago, after her mother called in tears, saying the cold was unbearable, and they couldn't afford the oil delivery. Clara had handled everything, calling the oil company, setting up automatic payments, logging every transfer in a spreadsheet she kept for herself. Last year alone she'd sent $2,800. This year $5,200. She'd done it without being asked, because she believed family was worth it. But now, staring at the screen, she saw the truth. She'd been the safety net, the one who caught them when they fell, while Lila was the one they coddled. The spreadsheet's last entry was from September. $500, sent to cover the early fall oil delivery. Clara's eyes lingered on the number, then drifted to the cancel service button. Her finger hovered over the mouse. She wasn't just canceling a payment. She was cutting a cord, one that had tethered her to a family that took her for granted. She thought of Lila, who'd burned through $18,000 of their parents' savings on her soap venture, ordering bulk glycerin from a factory in Ohio, designing fancy labels, and renting a booth at a craft fair where she sold exactly 3 bars. Their parents hadn't blinked, just sighed and said, "Lila's finding herself." Meanwhile, Clara worked overtime to cover their bills, skipping new boots to send money home, her back aching from lifting crates. She clicked the button. A pop-up appeared. Service will end on November 5th, 4 weeks before Thanksgiving. She closed the laptop, her hands trembling slightly, and walked to the window. The snow was falling harder now, blanketing the street in a soft white haze. She felt a pang of guilt, imagining her parents' house growing cold, but it was drowned out by a quieter, stronger feeling: relief. For the first time in years, she wasn't carrying their weight. She was choosing herself. The days after the call were a strange mix of freedom and unease. Clara went through her routines: early mornings at the warehouse, evenings cooking simple meals in her tiny kitchen, but the weight of her decision lingered, like a bruise that ached when pressed. She kept her phone on silent, avoiding the inevitable messages. On November 5th, the oil company sent a confirmation. The heating service for 317 Oak Street, her parents' address, had been terminated. Clara read the email while stirring a pot of lentil soup, the space heater warming her feet. Outside, the snow fell thick and relentless, piling up on the balcony railing. Winter had come early to St. Paul, and she knew the cold would bite harder in Rochester, where her parents' old house sat with its drafty windows and aging insulation. She didn't feel triumphant, but she didn't feel guilty either. It was a strange neutrality, a recognition that she'd done what she had to. The first message came 3 days later from her mother. "Clara, the heat's not working right. Can you call the oil company?" Clara stared at the text, then set her phone face down on the counter. She didn't reply. That evening Lila texted. Real mature Clara. No context, no explanation, just the usual jab. Clara ignored it, pouring herself a glass of cheap Merlot and settling into her armchair with a novel. The heater hummed, and the room smelled faintly of rosemary from the soup. For the first time in months, she let herself relax, the weight of her family's expectations slipping away like snow melting on a warm roof. On the 10th day, her father called. She let it go to voicemail, sipping coffee as the notification popped up. His voice was clipped, a mix of frustration and worry. "Clara, the house is 56 degrees. If you know something, call me back." She didn't listen to the message again. Instead, she bundled up in her thrift store coat and walked to a cafe on Grand Avenue, where the air smelled of espresso and cinnamon scones. She sat by the window watching the snow fall, and ordered a latte she wouldn't have splurged on a year ago. The warmth of the cafe, the murmur of strangers' conversations, Felt like a small rebellion, a reminder that she could live for herself. By mid-November, the messages grew more desperate. Her mother. Clara, it's 48 degrees in the house. Your dad's coughing and Lila's miserable. Please call. Her father. This isn't about money anymore. This is family. Lila, predictably venomous. You're so selfish, Clara. Hope you're happy now. Clara saved each message, not out of sentiment but as a reminder of how they'd treated her when she'd given everything. She didn't respond, didn't delete them. She just kept living. On November 18th, a snowstorm hit St. Paul, blanketing the city in white. News alerts warned of power outages and dangerous roads. Clara stayed inside, wrapped in a wool blanket, a mug of cocoa in her hands. The heater glowed orange, casting soft light across the room. She wondered briefly what her family was doing huddled in their living room. Maybe wrapped in every blanket they owned, cursing her name. But the thought didn't linger. She opened her novel, a story about a woman who walked away from her past, and let herself sink into the words. The wind howled outside, but inside her world was warm and quiet. Thanksgiving morning dawned cold and clear, the sky a pale blue that made the snow glitter. Clara woke early, the apartment silent except for the faint drip of the coffee maker. She made herself breakfast. Toast with almond butter, a sliced pear, a cup of black coffee. No turkey, no stuffing, no echoes of her mother's overcooked green beans. She didn't want to replicate the past. She wanted to build something new. At 9 a.m. she settled onto the couch, a documentary about Arctic wildlife playing on her laptop. The room smelled of coffee and cedar from a candle she'd lit, a small luxury she'd allowed herself. The doorbell rang at 10:30, sharp and insistent. Clara froze, her heart thudding. She knew who it was before she reached the door. Peering through the peephole, she saw her father, his face gaunt, his coat dusted with snow. His eyes held that familiar mix of frustration and expectation, as if he could will her back into compliance. She opened the door a crack, warm air spilling out into the cold. "Clara," he said, his breath clouding in the frigid air. "We need to talk." "I don't think today's the right day," she said, her voice calm but firm, her hand steady on the doorknob. "You cut the heat," he said, his tone flat, accusatory. "The house is 40 degrees. Your mom's sick, Lila's falling apart. What are you trying to prove?" Clara leaned against the doorframe, her gaze unwavering. "I didn't cut anything. I stopped paying. There's a difference." She paused, letting the words sink in. "I handled the oil payments for 2 years. Over $8,000. I ate ramen for weeks to cover your bills. And then you told me to stay away because Lila needed calm. So I did. I stayed away." Her father's jaw tightened, but he didn't look away. "You know we're not good with that stuff. The account was in your name. When you canceled, they didn't even tell us." "Because it was never your responsibility," she said. "It was mine. Until it wasn't." She opened the door slightly wider, letting him glimpse the warm apartment behind her, the tidy kitchen, the glowing heater, the life she'd built without them. "You made a choice, Dad. You chose Lila's comfort over me. Now you get to live with it." He shifted his weight, snow crunching under his boots. "We're out of options, Clara. We've sold what we could. Your mom's got a fever. We can't afford the oil up front. I'm asking you one last time to help." She shook her head, her voice softer now but no less resolute. "You told me to stay back for Lila's sake. I did. I'm not your backup plan anymore." She paused, meeting his eyes. "I've found my peace. I hope you find yours." He stood there, silent, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps fading into the snow. Clara closed the door, the lock clicking with a quiet finality. She returned to the couch, her coffee still warm, and restarted the documentary. The Arctic wolves on the screen moved with purpose, surviving in a world that offered no mercy. Clara felt a kinship with them, not as a victim, but as a survivor. The weeks after Thanksgiving brought a strange calm. Clara's phone stayed quiet, the barrage of messages slowing to a trickle. She heard from her cousin Nora, who lived in Duluth and had always been the odd one out in the family, much like Clara. Over a crackling phone call, Nora filled her in. "Lila's gone off the deep end. Moved out after a fight with your dad. She's couch surfing in Minneapolis now, posting sob stories online about being abandoned. Your mom's staying with a cousin in Iowa. Says she's got pneumonia. Your dad, he sold your grandpa's coin collection to buy a month's worth of oil. They're barely hanging on. Clara listened, stirring a pot of chili as the heater hummed. I'm not surprised, she said, her voice steady. Lila's always been a storm. They just let her rage. Nora laughed, a sharp, knowing sound. You did the right thing, Clara. They treated you like an ATM. Family doesn't do that. I know, Clara said. I just wish it didn't take me this long to see it. She hung up and ladled the chili into a bowl, the spicy warmth filling the room. Outside, the snow fell in slow, heavy flakes, blanketing the city in silence. Clara's apartment was a haven, a place where she could breathe without the weight of her family's demands. She thought of the old house in Rochester, its creaky floors and drafty windows, now listed for sale on a real estate site Nora had sent her. The photos showed the living room where she'd once built forts with Lila, the kitchen where her mother taught her to make pancakes. But those memories felt distant, like they belonged to someone else. In early December, Nora called again, her voice tinged with amusement. Lila's at it again. Posted a video crying about how you destroyed the family. Didn't mention the $5,200 you sent or how they kicked you out of Thanksgiving. She's got some nerve. Clara smiled, sipping cocoa by the window. Let her talk. I don't need to defend myself anymore. You're a badass, Nora said. I'm proud of you. That evening, Clara walked to the used bookstore on West 7th Street, the snow crunching under her boots. The shop was warm, smelling of old paper and coffee. She picked out a novel about a woman who rebuilt her life after betrayal, paid for it with crumpled bills, and headed home. She lit a fire in the small fireplace she'd splurged on last year, the flames casting shadows on the brick wall. The book lay open on her lap, but her eyes drifted to the fire, steady and unyielding. She thought of her family, somewhere out there in the cold, and felt no anger, no sorrow, just clarity. She built her own warmth, her own life, and she wouldn't let anyone take it away. One afternoon in late December, the doorbell rang, a soft chime that broke the quiet of Clara's apartment. She was knitting a scarf, the wool soft under her fingers, a jazz record spinning on her thrift store turntable. She set the needles down, her brow furrowing. Deliveries didn't come this late, and Nora always texted first. She crossed to the door and peered through the peephole. Her mother stood there, bundled in a too-large coat, snow clinging to her scarf. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, not from the cold but from something deeper. Clara opened the door a fraction, the warm air meeting the icy wind. Mom, she said, her voice neutral. Why are you here? I took the bus, her mother said, her voice trembling. Walked from the station. I needed to see you. Clara didn't move, her hand resting on the doorknob. It's a blizzard out there. You shouldn't be walking. Her mother clutched her handbag, snow melting into puddles at her feet. I owe you an apology, Clara. Not just for Thanksgiving but for everything. For letting you carry us. For choosing Lila's feelings over yours. I was wrong. Clara tilted her head, studying her mother's face. The words were heavy, but they felt like echoes of a conversation that should have happened years ago. You're saying this now, she said, after I stopped paying. After the house got cold. Why should I believe you? Her mother's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. You don't have to. I just needed you to know I see it now. I see you. And I'm sorry I didn't sooner. Clara opened the door wider, not to invite her in but to let her feel the warmth of the life she'd built, a stark contrast to the cold her mother had come from. I needed you to see me when I was sending every paycheck home, she said. When I was excluded to keep Lila happy. When I was breaking my back to keep you warm. But you didn't. And now I've moved on. Her mother nodded, her hands trembling around the handbag. I'm not asking you to come back. I wanted you to know you matter. Clara looked at her for a long moment, then stepped back. I know I matter, she said. I learned that when I stopped waiting for you to tell me. She closed the door gently, the lock clicking into place. She returned to the couch, picked up her knitting, and let the jazz fill the room. The snow fell outside, but inside her world was warm, steady, hers. January brought a bitter cold that froze the Mississippi River and blanketed St. Paul in ice. Clara's life settled into a rhythm. Work, quiet evenings, the occasional call from Nora. Her family's messages had stopped entirely, and she felt no urge to reach out. Nora's updates painted a grim picture. Lila was bouncing between friends' couches, her online rants growing more desperate. Her mother had moved permanently to Iowa, living with a distant aunt. Her father was scraping by, the house still unsold, its pipes at risk of freezing. Clara listened, but the stories felt like reports from a distant country, one she no longer visited. One evening, as she sat by the fireplace with a cup of tea, Clara opened her laptop and pulled up the spreadsheet she'd kept for years. The numbers stared back at her. $8,000 over 2 winters, every dollar a sacrifice. She closed the file and deleted it, the action as final as closing a book. She didn't need the record anymore. She knew her worth. In February, Nora invited her to Duluth for a weekend. Clara packed a bag, boarded a bus, and spent 3 days hiking frozen trails and drinking hot cider by Lake Superior. The cold was brutal, but it felt clean, invigorating. She laughed with Nora, shared stories of her new life, and felt, for the first time, unburdened by the past. Back in St. Paul, Clara kept building. She enrolled in a night class at the community college, studying logistics to move up at the warehouse. She bought a new coat, not from a thrift shop but from a store, the wool soft and warm. She cooked elaborate meals, roasted chicken with thyme, creamy mushroom risotto, savoring the act of creating for herself. And every night, as the snow fell and the city slept, she sat by her fireplace, a book in hand, the flames a reminder that she'd learned to keep herself warm. Clara's story wasn't one of revenge or triumph, but of reclamation. She'd once believed family was a debt you paid without question, a bond that justified any sacrifice. But she'd learned that love, even familial, had limits, and that her worth wasn't tied to what she could give. She'd walked away from a house that no longer held her, and in its place she'd built a home, one brick, one fire, one choice at a time. The winter was long, but Clara was no longer shivering. She was free.
If you were the one in this story, how would you react? Would you stand up and fight back, or accept the unreasonable pressure and control from the HOA? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe, like, and share this video with more people. Your small action gives us the motivation to keep bringing you more intense and engaging stories. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.